morning. It's great to be here. Thank you, Ron, for the opening. It's fantastic. It's a great representation also of the partnerships that we aim to forge with organizations like the U.S. Embassy, with organizations like the government here in South Korea, but with organizations like all of you sitting out there. And it's critical, these partnerships, to the advancement of the field, to continue to innovate, and it's something that we're dedicated to. So really appreciate the commitment from you all of being here this morning. And I'm excited to see everybody out here. So I'm already starting 1 foot down this morning because I actually bet Suhong that if he asked me to come here and talk, nobody would show up. So I guess I owe him a bottle of soju or something like that now. But thanks, guys, for being here. I think it's going to be an exciting day, and I'm excited to be here with you. So earlier this year, Managed Defense discovered anomalous behavior in a client in the engineering sector. The FireEye appliances that they were using in that client's environment triggered on a commonly used pen testing tool called Cobalt Strike. They also triggered on Metasploit, which is a tool often utilized by hackers in these environments. Now, there was ongoing red team activity in this customer's environment. And so the Managed Defense customers had to deconflict this anomalous behavior with that ongoing red team activity. They coordinated with the intel practice. They called the customer, they talked to the customer, they identified that this was not the red team that they were seeing. And they identified that it was likely anomalous, or it was likely malicious. So they began responding. They spun up what's called Mandiant Rapid Response. Mandiant Rapid Response is an incident response capability afforded to Managed Defense customers in order to deal with incidents like this so that we can get Managed Defense customers the ability to respond quickly to these threats. Now, at the same time, FireEye machine learning algorithms flagged to the Managed Defense analysts that the activity we were seeing in that environment was potentially similar to activity that we've seen with a financial crime group that we track as Fin6. This is interesting, and this piqued the analyst's interest because Fin6 traditionally targets point-of-sale systems. They try to target and steal credit card data, right? Payment card data. So they wouldn't have any reason to target a customer in the engineering sector. It wasn't consistent. So again, they reached out. They reached out to intelligence. They reached out to the consulting practice. They identified that we'd seen similar activity spring up over the previous few months that also could potentially be attributed to Fin6, and that this was likely the group that was conducting the activity. So they confirmed, based on our profiles of how the actor behaved in these environments, based on our knowledge from incident response that we had conducted, that this was likely the actor, but it didn't answer the question of why they were operating in this engineering company's environment. So they continued to dig deeper. They looked at the data that had come off of those incident response activities. They continued to investigate, and they identified that in some of those instances, they actually saw Fin6 start to deploy ransomware, which is a tactic that we hadn't previously seen. And so what we think we were seeing was actually a financial crime group in the middle of evolving their tactics and their techniques. A financial crime group that was moving into monetizing their access to these exploited environments in a new way. And we were able to identify that this was Fin6 doing this, and that Fin6 was now moving into a new environment, and so that expanded the targeting scope of the group. Now, armed with that information, armed with the understanding that it was likely Fin6 in this environment, the incident responders on site now have a playbook, because they have an understanding based on all the knowledge that we have of previous incidents that we've investigated that involve Fin6 of how that actor operates in this environment. They identified quickly that the initial compromise came from the compromise of an internet-facing system, and that the actor then moved laterally using compromised credentials via Windows Remote Desktop Protocol internally. With an understanding of where they were likely to go next and that they may be seeking to deploy ransomware, they were able to use FireEye endpoint detection to contain the compromised systems quickly, as well as contain the compromised servers, and then to eventually eradicate that actor from the environment. Now, what's really impressive is this entire event, this entire story that I just told you, took place over the course of 2 hours. 2 hours, right? So from initial detection to containment, and then eventual eradication shortly thereafter, all took place in the course of 2 hours. What this allowed us to do, what this incident allows us to do, is then go back and explore a little bit more, dig deeper into the data that we had gotten off of that incident response, dig deeper into how Fin6 had operated in that environment, and to identify that indeed we did find servers that had been reconfigured to distribute malware, in this case, a ransomware known as Locker Goga, which some of you are probably familiar with. It's been in the news recently. So we saw now Fin6 employing the Ryuk, which they'd done in previous incidents in the Locker Goga malware. We've got a new template for how they behave in these customer environments. And what that allows us to do is then take that knowledge, take that data off of this incident response and how they behaved in that environment and create new detections that we can proliferate across the universe of our own technology that sits in your networks, right, to protect you, so that we can proliferate the knowledge taken from this single incident across the entire universe of our customer base and ensure more proactive security, more proactive defense, and better protection for you and your customers. That's the type of capability that FireEye offers. So for those of you not familiar, right, and as Eric and others have alluded to this morning, FireEye in its current state today exists as a company that really combines three core capabilities, right? So first, FireEye itself as an organization, as a technology company, was started in 2004, right? FireEye now has built in 2014, purchased Mandiant, the leading incident response company. That gives us that deep knowledge, that deep understanding of how these threat actors behave in incident response environments. In 2016, we purchased Eyesight Partners, another outstanding company in its own right that provided cyber threat intelligence. That's where I work in the organization, the FireEye Threat Intelligence organization that grew out of that Eyesight Partners organization, to again understand the deep knowledge of how these threat actors behave and how they operate. So it's the fusion of these capabilities together that allow FireEye to provide a greater depth and a greater breadth of knowledge than anybody else in the market today. It's what allows FireEye to do things like name more APT groups, identify more APT actors than anybody else. It allows FireEye to discover more zero-day threats than anybody else, right? It allows us to better characterize for you, for your customers, for your network defenders, for your executive leadership, how these threats are operating so you can manage risk, so you can manage your investments, so you can better and proactively defend yourselves. And what I want to do today over the next few minutes is to give you some insight from what we've seen off of this visibility, to tell you a little bit about where we think these threats are going, where we think they're evolving to, right? How we think that they're going to change, and the primary drivers advancing that change over the coming months and the coming years. Before I do that, I figure you probably want to know a little bit more about who I am. So like we said, my name's Ryan Whelan. I'm the Director of Strategic Intelligence Operations for FireEye Threat Intel, sitting in that threat intelligence business line within FireEye. I joined FireEye from PwC, if you're familiar with PwC, back in August of last year. At PwC, I was doing strategy consulting to senior executives in the United States government. We were doing digital transformation efforts, and I was working on how to build strategic plans around implementation of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and automation capabilities to better improve mission outcomes, right, to drive operational effectiveness within the government. Before that, I spent a long time in government. First, I was in the U.S. Army. I worked as an intelligence officer there, and then later an information operations officer. And then I moved over to being a government civilian, where I worked in cyber counterintelligence, meaning I worked against foreign intelligence threats targeting U.S. critical infrastructure, U.S. defense, and that industry there. So when I joined FireEye, they said, hey, you get to pick your own title. So I came up with like all these really cool titles, like like Cyber Threat Intel Ninja Warrior and stuff like that. But my wife said that nobody would take me seriously. Sometimes I'm surprised that people take me seriously anyway. But so we settled on strategic intelligence operations, and I know that sounds like I just jammed three words together, but what it actually is, it means something to me. So I do have a hand in the operational activities of the Intel business line. I do work on strategy development for the Intel business line, but what's most important about it for me is that strategy, like intelligence, right? Strategy is designed to help shape thinking within organizations. It's designed to help unify decision-making at all tiers of an organization, so that you can collectively make decisions, right, on the same plane about how you're going to apply resources, how you're going to invest, what you're going to do, what you're not going to do. And similar to strategy, Intel should provide you that level of visibility. Intel should provide you actionable information to allow you to make effective decisions and manage risk. So we're going to talk about a little bit today, like I said, is some of the trends that we see, some of the drivers that we see pushing threat activity in cyberspace. And naturally, to look over the horizon, to look out at the future, I'm going to start with something that's always been true, and that's the preeminence of geopolitics, right? And I know it seems simple to say, but the simple fact of the matter is that you cannot divorce geopolitical consequences, geopolitical importance from the actions of these threat actors. At the end of the day, all this activity is committed by someone sitting behind a keyboard, somebody that has a mission, somebody that's part of an organization or part of some sort of activity that has an objective to fulfill, and that objective is driven by the geopolitical situation, the socioeconomic conditions that drive them to be sitting in that chair in the first place. Understanding the geopolitical situation is critical to understanding the level of risk that we face from these actors. Now, lucky for you guys, you live in one of the quietest geopolitical neighborhoods on the planet. Or not, right? Obviously, Asia-Pacific region, holistically, the Korean Peninsula in particular, is one of the most dynamic, one of the most active geopolitical places on the earth, right? Whether it's looking at continued ongoing negotiations with North Korea, whether it's Chinese expansion, whether it's Russian influence, American engagement, tensions with Japan, every day carries a new headline about something going on in the region, and that makes this part of the world ripe for cyber espionage and cyber crime. Now, what I want to highlight are a few examples that we've seen over the last year or so that speak to the importance of geopolitics, right? And so, the first of these is APT-37. Now, APT-37 is a North Korean cyber espionage group, right? North Korean cyber espionage group that we assess conducts traditional cyber espionage activities. APT-37 has been active since about 2012, but they have drastically improved capability over the last 6-7 years, right? Up to the point where back in 2011, 2012, they were basically conducting simple denial of service attacks. Last year, we identified the fact that they have actual zero-day capability, right? Meaning they can exploit a vulnerability that's never been before identified in the wild by cybersecurity professionals, right? It takes resources, it takes commitment, it takes a lot of investment in order to develop that kind of capability. 37 is important to us. APT-37 is important because they're one of the most prolific actors that we see targeting South Korea today. One of the primary TTPs they use, one of the primary tactics and techniques that this actor uses is to essentially weaponize the geopolitical situation that you all find yourselves situated in, right? 90% of compromises still start with an email. If 90% of compromises still start with an email, those actors are weaponizing the conditions that we find ourselves in order to essentially fool you, fool your users, into letting them walk in through the front door, right? That's what they're doing. And so this is a great example. This is an example of APT-37, a lure that they pushed out back in February of this year. This is a document and an email that purported to be talking about the ongoing negotiations between President Trump and Kim in North Korea. And it contained malware that was dropped on into target environments. This one in particular targeted various academic institutions, targeted think tanks, targeted government here in South Korea, right? Organizations that help to inform the strategic outlook, the strategic position of South Korea, right? So it fits the model of APT-37 targeting, right, to inform North Korean strategic intent. So APT-37 was a big one for us. Another big one for us over the last year was APT-38, right? APT-38 is really interesting. APT-38 is interesting because it is unique among APT actors. It's unique because its entire existence is essentially to rob banks. That's what APT-38 does. They rob banks, but they're a state-sponsored actor, right? We usually look at state-sponsored actors, we think military activity, we think defense, we think intelligence collection, right? This actor exists solely due to the geopolitical conditions present here on the Korean Peninsula. They only exist because of the effectiveness of sanctions and because of the isolation of the North Korean regime and the need of that regime in order to be able to obtain hard currency to continue to function, continue to operate on a global scale. APT-38 continued to demonstrate deep improvements in cyber espionage capabilities on North Korea's behalf, right? They spent years, we saw, in the longest case, we saw them in a compromised environment conducting reconnaissance for over 2 years. As they mapped out that network, they identified the accounts that would best allow them access to the SWIFT network, right? They conducted extensive reconnaissance on specific individuals, specific job functions, in order to target those individuals and those jobs that would give them, once they compromised those accounts, the best opportunity to exploit the SWIFT network. For those of you who don't know, that SWIFT is essentially it's the backbone that we use to conduct financial transactions, right? Monetary to monetary financial transactions between financial institutions. And once they compromised that network, they had a deep attack framework that involved numerous custom-developed tools designed specifically to allow them to get into the network, right? So it's called DIPAC. It was this unique framework that they developed that was designed to, once they compromised the SWIFT network, to essentially initiate fraudulent transactions, to steal funds, and then to cover up those transactions. And so one of the things they integrated here was obfuscation techniques in order to hide themselves, hide that activity from network defenders and from hunters like FireEye. Right? So really deep capability, and what 37 and 38 and the emergence, the real demonstration that we've seen here, what that shows us is that North Korea is committed to maintaining cyber espionage, is committed to maintaining cyber operations as a core pillar for how they're going to continue to pursue shaping the environment around them, the environment in this region, to be advantageous to North Korean activities, and to obtain the hard currency that we're talking about here. And I'll give you a little hint. We're getting better and better about preventing their compromise in the SWIFT networks. So we need to start thinking about where they're going next, right? We have seen some indications that it might be cryptocurrency, but there's no guarantee. And so if you're in the financial industry and you know that this threat actor is out there and they're looking for their next means of obtaining hard currency, you need to start thinking about how they might start targeting your organization. I can't come to this part of the world and not talk about the elephant in the room. That's obviously China, right? We've seen significant reemergence of Chinese activity since late December in 2017. So between 2015 and 2017, the Chinese kind of had a downturn in cyber espionage activity. They didn't totally turn it off, but we saw a significant decline in the amount of activity that was taking place worldwide. We assess that's because the Chinese government, under President Xi, was consolidating Chinese cyber operations activity under President Xi's control with the Strategic Support Force. And now what we've seen since the end of 2017 is a reemergence of Chinese cyber activity. We've seen it operating now in a much more concerted fashion, meaning they're dedicated to a similar mission. They have a similar vision, a similar set of objectives that they're going after. One of the primary objectives that they're doing, one of the primary objectives that they hold, is to support the Belt and Road Initiative. The Belt and Road Initiative is essentially the construction of a new Silk Road, right, by the Chinese. It's a $1 trillion infrastructure investment to connect China with Europe via both a land route and a new sea lane, right? $1 trillion. And so what we're seeing is Chinese cyber operations activity, particularly espionage activity, dedicating to help support this initiative, right? To essentially look after their investment, understand what is the economic climate, and what's the direction of that climate? Where is it going in these countries? How are competitors positioning against the Chinese firms that are part of this investment, right? Because they want the Chinese companies to be the most competitive companies possible. And so we see them conducting espionage operations to understand that, understand what the political dynamics are as they evolve in these countries. A great example of this is APT-40. APT-40 existed before that downturn in activity that I mentioned that we saw in 2015. They historically targeted maritime and defense sectors, right? They targeted the maritime and defense sectors likely to support Chinese naval development. When we saw them reemerge, right, and you can see here by the activity graph, when we saw them reemerge at the end of 2017, the primary focus that they're targeting now still included those maritime equities, but what they added to their portfolio is also support to targeting regionally to support the understanding of the Belt and Road Initiative. Most notably, we saw APT-40 extremely active in targeting the Cambodian elections last year in June, July 2018, where they were looking after the infrastructure investments going on in Cambodia and trying to understand what the political landscape was and how these power dynamics were going to shift and change over time. And so you have APT-40's activity now being kind of re-engineered, redirected to match, right, Chinese strategic interests. Again, geopolitics is the driver behind that. So hopefully we understand, you have to consider what your position is in the geopolitical landscape, right? Are you a financial organization that may be at risk of being targeted by APT-38? Are you a company who's operating in one of these countries in Southeast Asia, right, who sells maritime technology or operates at a port that might find themselves in competition with a Chinese company that's part of that Belt and Road Initiative making you vulnerable to Chinese espionage operations just to understand how they can competitively position against you, right? Understanding your position in that threat landscape is critical to understanding what the level of risk is to your organization and to your networks. Now, the next major trend that I want to highlight is an important one to me, and that's the theft of personal identifying information. All right, we're all familiar with the major breaches that we've seen, in history of the last few years, right? Anthem, Equifax, OPM, especially in the US, those were huge headline breaches, right? Millions of records stolen. My data itself was lost in both OPM and Equifax, which means the Chinese totally know who I am, which is fantastic, it's fine. So we're familiar with those, but what you may not be familiar with is we've seen a significant escalation in the focus of stealing this type of information over the last few years. A great example of this is actually the fourth espionage group, the fourth APT actor that we named in 2018. That's APT 39. All right, we actually publicly announced APT 39 in January of this year. Now, APT 39 is an Iranian actor that specifically exists for the purpose of targeting personal information. They do that, in our assessment, in order to actually support targeting that's important to the Iranian regime. So they target individuals and organizations that the Iranian regime is interested in, right, in order to conduct operational handoffs, whether that's to other cyber espionage activity or other cyber activity, or even to things going on in the physical domain, right? APT 39 has focused on doing things like targeting airline reservation systems to pull travel data, travel documents, right? They've targeted telecommunications companies extensively, and in those telecommunications companies, we've seen them actually try to gain access to the core network, which would allow them not only access to internals of SMS data, text messages, but it would allow them to do things like spoof text messages. So they open a new attack vector, right, to send disguised text messages looking like a trusted contact back to these end users. And the theft of this personal identifying information is not only something that we've seen abroad, it's something that we've seen right here in Korea as well, right? Again, APT 37, our most prolific actor, again, weaponizing geopolitical information, right? This time, back in December of this year, APT 37 used a lure document, this one purporting to be a survey on North Korean denuclearization from the University of Korea, right? Used a lure document to target a North Korean resettlement agency. So, resettlement agency here in South Korea, and they stole 997 records on North Korean defectors, right? Theft of personal information. What's especially concerning about the theft of this personal information is that as we see the escalation taking off, the increase in the theft of this personal data, we simultaneously see the increasing emergence of advanced technologies like artificial intelligence, like automation, that will give actors the ability to weaponize this personal data in a way to a level to design things like personal attacks, right? And on a scale that we've never seen before. We've already seen with DNS hijacking how automation can help organizations target in a much broader scale than we've previously seen, right? And in a much more compressed period of time. And in order to leverage this big data, actors will be able to use things like the emergence of advanced technologies like AI in order to target individuals via the information that they've collected. The other key factor here is that this potentially drastically and exponentially increases the risk burden that we face as companies, right? It increases the level of risk that we carry because no longer is it about just us. No longer is it just about protecting our data, our IP, our personnel. We have to worry about all the customers that we're responsible for. We have to worry about the third-party vendors that we work with. 59%, a recent study just came out this week, 59% of companies who had a compromise said that they had a compromise due to third-party vendors that they work with, right? 59%. How long is it going to be until we begin to be held responsible for the compromises that we enable as compromised organizations? So it increases that risk burden. The last trend that we're seeing, the last important piece to comment on here, is the targeting of operational technology. 2018 was a watershed year. It was a change in the development of we've seen as actors developing capabilities to target operational technology. For those of you who don't know, operational technology is essentially the backbone, right, of critical infrastructure, right? The infrastructure that it's the technology that allows our trains to operate, the technology that allows our energy systems to operate, right? Nuclear power plants, they all run on these industrial control systems, and that's what we mean by operational technology there. I say it was a watershed year because we identified back in late 2017 the Triton attack framework. We put out a number of reports reports over the course of 2018 on Triton, and I'm doing a deep dive discussion on Triton a little bit later today, which you can all come to. But what that framework was a very in-depth capability to start at the IT layer, but then rapidly pivot down to the operational technology layer, all the way down to the safety control systems. And it was designed to specifically target a specific control system that we actually believe the actor purchased and tested this attack framework against before implementing it in the wild. We've never before seen an actor get this deep into a critical infrastructure organization, and we assessed that the intent of the actor was to actually eventually cause some sort of physical destruction at the plant, because there's no other reason to attack the safety systems, right? You attack a safety system. The safety system is the last line of defense of a plant before it goes into to prevent destructive activity, to move into an unsafe state. If you remove that safety system, you allow the plant to move into an unsafe state and realize some sort of critical failure. So this was a change, and this is being publicly released. This is out there, and so we expect to see movement in this direction. But again, this type of targeting is not only something we've seen abroad, it's something that we've seen right here. Again, TempTick is an organization, Chinese activity, that we see commonly targeting the energy sector here in South Korea, as well as in Japan. This is another example of a lure document. Again, it all starts with an email. This one highlighting energy issues because they're targeting the energy sector, but again, that allowed TempTick to get in, drop its hard cement payload, and compromise an environment. Really interestingly, we just saw another Chinese group in the last week called Tonto Team shift its focus as well. We've seen Tonto Team traditionally target aerospace defense industries. We've never before seen them target things like energy. We had the first instance of Tonto Team targeting the energy sector in the last week, which could indicate a shift in Chinese interests in targeting critical infrastructure. And with things like Triton now on the market, with things like Triton now visible, it could indicate that the Chinese are interested in moving into the development of capabilities that are similar in order to have an ability, if they need it, to target critical infrastructure in that way. These are things and risks that we need to be worried about, and they're concerns that we need to be aware of for the coming years. So what do we do about it? What do we do about it? What does FireEye do? We do this, right? We get up, we try and advance knowledge. We try and share the information that we have. We try and share the data that we see in these attacks and our understanding of how these threat actors operate so that we can elevate public knowledge about them. We try and forge partnerships like the ones that we've already talked about today with governments around the world, right? So that we can enable action, so that we can raise costs to these threat actors. Most importantly, we partner with industry. We partner with customers like you to help advance, to help share this data about improving detection, right? And to share new metrics about how can we improve timing, how can we measure how effective we are about thwarting these threats, right? Partnerships are critical to creating communities of resilience, right? We want to build resilient communities around the globe that make it harder for threat actors like the ones we discussed today to conduct the criminal and the cyber and the espionage activities that they're interested in conducting. What does FireEye do? FireEye offers that capability to you, right? FireEye brings to market a unique blend of capabilities that are not available collectively anywhere else in the market, right? The ability to characterize these threats was only done, right? Eric told you earlier today, 250,000 hours of incident response. The ability to characterize these threats is only done by looking across those thousands of hours of incidents and being able to deeply understand how those threats behave and how they act. It's only able to be done through the unique intelligence collection capability that we have, directly interacting with these actors in the dark web, understanding what new capabilities they're looking to purchase, what new capabilities they're looking to develop and require, to understand how they're looking to evolve. Right? It's only through understanding how they transit thousands of network nodes globally and looking at that telemetry data to understand where they may be moving to next, what kinds of trends are we seeing in shifting patterns, right? We fuse all that together, and what that does is it fuels an innovation engine so that we can take that knowledge from the front lines and update your ability to take action on it in near real time. If you buy our appliances, those appliances get those updates immediately as soon as we can do them, right? That's what that FireEye Labs team does. All they do is take this new data about those threats, that new intelligence, and they update those appliances, right? We also try and make that aware, and so that allows us the ability to do and to deliver impactful breach protection. So let me leave you with one more story, okay? So earlier, this one was late last year. This was in the financial industry. And again, this one's managed defense, right? The managed defense activity. And again, FireEye appliances alerted on a commonly used pen testing tool, Cobalt Strike, okay? You see a pattern there. Cobalt Strike's really popular with hackers. Again, there is an ongoing red team activity in this environment. So at first, managed defense said, stand down. They told the client, stand down. We think it's the red team. But they talked to the red team, and then they also talked to Mandiant's incident responders, and they identified the fact that they had seen similar activity to this in 3 previous incidents, all in the financial industry. And that raised a red flag. We said, we don't think this is actually, we don't think this is a red team. We think this is malicious. And so they spun up immediately. They went back to the customer. They spun up Mandiant Incident Response, right? So at 1340, Mandiant Engaged began containing the activity. And by 1433, that actor was totally eradicated from the environment. What's truly amazing about this is that from first detection at 1057 to total eradication at 1433 in the afternoon, only 3 hours and 36 minutes elapsed, right? 3 hours and 36 minutes. Compare that to the average time of an actor, average dwell time of an actor in a compromised environment of 78 days. All right? That's what leading with intelligence does, right? It provides this living knowledge of actor evolution so that you can enhance your defenses at the pace of the cyber threat, so that you can advance your defenses and enhance your defenses at the pace of the cyber adversary. Right? Leading with intelligence allows us to innovate ahead of our adversaries so that together we can stop these emerging threats of tomorrow. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.